My name is Sophie Carter, and the day I told my family I wanted to be an environmental engineer was the day my father tried to make me the punchline of his favorite joke. He humiliated me in front of cousins, uncles, and neighbors, laughing like my dream was a child's fantasy instead of the work of a lifetime. But the next dinner changed everything, and I'm sure you'll want to see what exactly happened. Before we dive in, tell me, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I'd love to know how far this story will travel. The cicadas were screaming that Texas evening, their steady chorus wrapping around the Carter backyard like heat waves you could hear. Folding tables sagged under trays of brisket and sweet tea pitchers, and the smell of hickory smoke clung to every thread of my summer dress. I'd rehearsed this conversation in my head for weeks, even choosing this family barbecue because I thought the warm air and cold beer might soften my father's mood. I was wrong. Robert Carter, my father, stood at the head of the longest table, his ball cap tilted back just enough to show a thin strip of sunburn along his hairline. He'd been telling stories about the good old days in the family's construction business, peppering his sentences with names like Bart and his sister Amy, who had both done the sensible thing and joined him straight out of school. When there was a lull, I slid in my words like a secret I hoped he'd cradle instead of crush. "I've decided," I said, my voice steady. "I want to be an environmental engineer. I want to work on clean water systems, design solutions for communities that don't have safe drinking water." It was the kind of dream that had been growing in me since freshman year, ever since I learned what lead pipes had done to kids in Flint. I expected at least curiosity. Instead, his reaction hit like a sucker punch. Robert barked out a laugh so loud it startled Aunt Linda's terrier under the table. "An environmental engineer." He dragged the words like they tasted bad. "Sophie, we pour concrete and frame houses in this family. You're chasing fairy tales while Bart here's already managing his own crew." The chuckles started with him, but they caught like dry grass. My cousin wiped barbecue sauce from his beard and smirked. Someone muttered, "Guess she'll be hugging trees for a living." Even the clink of ice in cups seemed sharper. I tried to smile, but my cheeks felt stiff, like my skin had turned to plaster. The brisket on my plate blurred. My throat worked against the sudden tightness in my chest. I wanted to tell them about the designs I'd studied, the places I'd seen in documentaries where children walked miles for water no cleaner than the puddles in our driveway. I wanted to say that saving lives was more than sensible, it was necessary. But every time I opened my mouth, I saw the way Robert's eyes crinkled with amusement, as though my passion was just another of my phases he'd outwait until I came to my senses. The longer the laughter lasted, the more it lodged in my bones, not just the sound, but the fact that no one, not even my mother, spoke up. It was easier for them to join the joke than stand against Robert. I picked at my food, waiting for the sting in my eyes to fade before I excused myself to check on the drinks. Out by the cooler, away from the noise, I gripped the cold aluminum of a soda can until it dug into my palm. That's when I made the promise. One day, I'd build something so important, so undeniable that even Robert Carter couldn't laugh at it. And I wouldn't just prove him wrong. I'd make him wish he'd believed me from the start. The library always smelled faintly of paper, dust, and something floral that reminded me of my grandmother's attic. It wasn't glamorous, but after the barbecue fiasco, it was the only place in town where my chest didn't feel tight. Rows of books stood like polite sentinels, and the low hum of the air conditioner filled the silences between turning pages. Mrs. Kendra Lewis, my science teacher, sat at one of the corner tables, her glasses perched low on her nose as she graded a stack of lab reports. She was the kind of woman who could make you feel seen without even looking directly at you, like she knew your thoughts before you'd said them. I'd promised myself I'd tell her what happened, though part of me felt silly. Wasn't I too old to be running to a teacher for comfort? She looked up when I approached, her face softening into a smile that actually reached her eyes. "Sophie, you're here earlier than usual." I slid into the chair across from her, shrugging. "Couldn't concentrate at home." She set her pen down. "Something tells me this isn't about chemistry homework." Her words broke open the dam I'd been holding since Saturday night. I told her about the barbecue, the way my father had laughed like my dream was a bad joke, how the rest of the family followed his lead, and how I couldn't think of a single thing to say to make them take me seriously. My voice wavered when I admitted that maybe they were right. Maybe this whole environmental engineering thing was out of my league. Mrs. Lewis listened without interrupting, her fingers laced together on the table. When I finally trailed off, she leaned forward. "Do you know what I see when you talk about water systems? You light up. That's not the kind of passion you fake, Sophie. And it's certainly not the kind you give up on just because someone else can't see it." Her certainty startled me. It wasn't just polite encouragement. It felt grounded, like she'd already decided I was capable. "There's a statewide scholarship exam for aspiring engineers in the spring," she continued. "It's tough, covers advanced math, design principles, environmental science. But I think you could not only pass, you could score in the top tier. I'll mentor you if you're willing to put in the work." The words "top tier" made my heart jump in a way I wasn't prepared for. "You really think I could do that? I wouldn't waste my time if I didn't." Her tone was matter-of-fact, like she was stating a law of physics. "We'd start right away. After school, maybe weekends if you can manage. This isn't about proving your father wrong, Sophie. It's about proving to yourself that your vision is worth pursuing." I nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside me, not the roaring determination I'd felt the night of the barbecue, but something quieter and steadier, like the first steady flame on a match. "I'll do it." Her smile widened just slightly. "Good. I'll put together a study plan tonight. And Sophie," she paused until I met her eyes, "the world doesn't need more people doing what's sensible. It needs people who see what's broken and have the courage to fix it." For the first time in days, the weight in my chest eased. We spent the next hour mapping out topics: fluid dynamics, filtration technologies, materials science. It felt overwhelming on paper, but Mrs. Lewis broke it down into manageable steps: pages to read, problems to solve, diagrams to draw. The way she spoke made it seem less like an impossible climb and more like a trail I could actually follow. When I finally left the library, the sun had dipped low, and the cicadas were just beginning their evening chorus again. The air outside was still thick, but I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying a backpack full of bricks and someone had taken half the weight. My father's laughter still echoed in the back of my mind, but it no longer sounded like a verdict. It sounded like background noise, something I could drown out with the right kind of focus. As I walked home, I thought about the exam. It was more than just a test. It was a way forward. And for the first time, I let myself imagine not just passing, but excelling. Because maybe, just maybe, Mrs. Lewis was right. The hiss of the espresso machine at the cafe had become the soundtrack of my afternoons. I'd started working there 2 weeks after Mrs. Lewis gave me the scholarship plan, partly for the paycheck, partly because I needed the hours away from home to clear my head. My shifts were just long enough to cover textbooks, bus fare, and the occasional latte I allowed myself as a study treat. The cafe, bean and gone, sat on the corner of Main and Polk, with wide front windows that caught the late Texas sun. The air inside was a mix of roasted beans, cinnamon from the pastries, and the faint detergent scent from freshly wiped tables. Regulars drifted in like clockwork: Mr. Hanley at 3, 15 for his Earl Grey, the Carter twins, no relation, at 4, 00 for caramel macchiatos before dance practice. In between customers, I kept my exam prep notebook under the counter. Mrs. Lewis's assignments came in neat weekly packets, each with her careful handwriting in the margins. Remember, formulas are tools, not magic spells. I'd flip through practice problems while the drip coffee finished brewing, jotting down solutions until the bell above the door rang. Balancing the two worlds, the noise of the cafe and the quiet discipline of study, wasn't easy. Some nights after closing, I'd feel the weight of exhaustion pressing me into the bus seat, my eyelids fluttering as streetlights flashed past. But the moment I stepped into the library, the smell of old books and the low hum of the air conditioner grounded me again. Mrs. Lewis was always there, already deep into grading or sketching diagrams for my next study packet. She didn't hover. She just worked beside me, occasionally tapping my page when she saw me hesitate over a problem. "Overthinking," she'd say without looking up. "Trust the process." At home, my father's indifference was a wall I couldn't climb. If he noticed I was working or studying, he didn't say much, just reminded me every so often that a real job would be waiting if I wanted it. Sometimes he'd drop comments about Bart's latest construction project, his voice carrying just enough weight to make me feel the comparison. I didn't argue anymore. It felt pointless to try to convince someone who'd already decided I was wrong. Instead, I let the silence stand between us, using it as fuel. One Thursday night, I stayed late at the library, deep in a section on water treatment membranes. The fluorescent lights cast long, pale shadows across the tables, and outside, the parking lot was almost empty. I felt the equation click in my head, the numbers finally aligning with the diagram in a way that made sense. That rush, that sudden clarity was addictive. I realized then that I wasn't just studying to prove anything to my father. I was studying because I wanted to know more, to solve the puzzle for myself. Still, the days bled together, early mornings brewing coffee, afternoons serving pastries, evenings buried in textbooks. I started keeping a running tally in my planner. Hours worked, hours studied. The balance tilted more toward studying every week, even if it meant surviving on cheap meals and less sleep. One night, I collapsed onto my bed without changing out of my cafe uniform. My hands smelled faintly of vanilla syrup, my brain still buzzing from converting liters to cubic meters for a filtration problem. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but somewhere in the grind, I felt a new layer of confidence settling in. Not the brash, "I'll show them" kind of confidence. This was quieter, rooted in the fact that I was showing up for myself every single day, no matter how tired or distracted or tempted to quit I felt. The more I studied, the more the exam shifted in my mind from an intimidating hurdle to a challenge I could actually meet head-on. Mrs. Lewis noticed it too. One evening, after I finished a particularly tricky set of problems without needing her help, she looked at me over her glasses and said, "You've got the discipline most adults wish they had." The words stuck with me as I walked home, my bag heavy with books. I passed the construction site where my father's crew had been working all week, steel beams rising into the twilight, and wondered if he'd ever notice how much work I was putting into my own kind of building. Maybe he wouldn't, but I was beginning to realize that his recognition wasn't the prize I was after anymore. The morning of the exam, my alarm went off before sunrise. The apartment was still and shadowy, the only sound the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I'd laid out my clothes the night before, a plain white blouse, dark jeans, and my most comfortable sneakers. No distractions, no risks. The bus ride downtown felt longer than usual. Dallas was waking up, streets slick with last night's rain, delivery trucks idling at intersections, the smell of coffee drifting from open cafe doors. My backpack sat heavy on my lap, even though I'd triple-checked that all I needed was my ID, my test confirmation, and a handful of sharpened pencils. By the time the testing center came into view, a squat, glass-fronted building between a bank and an insurance office, my stomach was in knots. I stood outside for a moment, staring at my reflection in the doors. This was it. Every late night in the library, every shift at the cafe, every moment I'd swallowed my father's dismissal, it all led here. I took a deep breath and reached for the handle. "Sophie!" I froze, turning toward the voice. There, walking briskly across the sidewalk, was Mrs. Lewis. She was in her weekend clothes, dark slacks, a soft blue sweater, and she was holding something small in her hand. "I couldn't let you walk in without this," she said, pressing a sleek silver pen into my palm. It was heavier than it looked, the kind of pen you'd never dare chew the cap of. I blinked. "You didn't have to." "I did," she interrupted gently. "I bought it when I got my first teaching job, wrote every test and lecture with it. I thought it might bring you the same kind of luck it brought me." Something in my chest loosened, the pressure easing just a little. "Thank you, really." She smiled, but her gaze was steady. "Remember, you've already done the work. The test is just you telling it what you already know. And no matter what happens, you've shown discipline and grit most people only talk about." Her words stayed with me long after I walked inside and checked in. The testing room was quiet but tense, rows of desks spaced evenly, the faint scent of pencil shavings and industrial carpet cleaner. My seat was near the window, where gray clouds promised more rain. When the proctor gave the signal, I clicked the pen, though I mostly used the provided pencils. It wasn't about writing with it. It was about the reminder of the person who believed I could do this. The first section was grueling. Complex equations, diagrams I had to label, case studies that tested not just memorization but problem solving. But as the minutes passed, I found myself sinking into the rhythm, the way I had in the library late at night. By the time the final page was collected, my shoulders ached and my eyes felt grainy, but I knew deep down that I'd done well. It wasn't until 3 weeks later that the results came in. I was at the cafe wiping down the pastry case when my phone buzzed with the subject line, Statewide Engineering Scholarship Exam Results. My breath caught as I tapped it open. Top percentile statewide. I read it twice, then a third time, afraid I'd imagined it. The cafe's chatter faded to a dull hum as I stood there, grinning like an idiot at the screen. That night, an envelope from Texas Tech arrived in the mail. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside, in bold letters, "We are pleased to award you a full scholarship in recognition of your outstanding achievement." I sat on the edge of my bed, letter in one hand, Mrs. Lewis's silver pen in the other. My father hadn't said much when I'd told him about the exam weeks earlier, but now I wondered how he'd react, whether he'd see the weight of what this meant. Maybe he wouldn't, but I knew. And for now, that was enough. Lubbock smelled different from Dallas, dustier, drier, with the faint sweetness of cotton fields carried on the wind. The campus of Texas Tech spread wide under an endless sky, red brick buildings glowing in the sun, students crisscrossing on bikes and skateboards. I arrived with 2 suitcases, a single duffel, and the silver pen tucked safely in my backpack like a charm. My dorm room was small but bright, with a view of the quad and a desk I immediately claimed as my study base. Moving in was a blur, meeting my raw, learning where the laundry room was, figuring out which dining hall had the best coffee. It felt like stepping into a new version of myself, one that didn't have to explain or defend her choices every time she opened her mouth. The first week of classes was overwhelming. Fluid mechanics at 8 a.m., environmental systems at 10, calculus in the afternoons. My professors spoke quickly, tossing out terms like turbidity and osmotic pressure, as if everyone had been speaking that language their whole lives. But then, one Wednesday in the campus cafe, I overheard a conversation that made me stop mid-sip. "If we could build a portable unit, we could cut down filtration times by half," a deep voice said. I turned to see a tall guy with warm brown skin and close-cropped hair leaning over a laptop. Across from him sat a petite girl with an undercut and a bright teal streak running through her bangs, sketching something on a notepad. Beside her, a broad-shouldered guy in a baseball cap was scrolling through what looked like diagrams on his tablet. I must have been staring because the girl looked up and grinned. "You're in Dr. Jeller's systems class, right? Sophie, isn't it?" I nodded, surprised she knew my name. "Come sit," the tall guy said, waving me over. "I'm Jamal. This is Erica and that's Miguel. We're kicking around ideas for a sustainable water startup." The word startup lit up something in my chest. I slid into the empty chair. Jamal explained that he'd grown up in Houston, near neighborhoods where the tap water sometimes ran brown after heavy rains. Erica's family was from New Mexico, where drought was a constant threat. Miguel's parents still lived in a rural Texas town where old pipes leaked more than they delivered. "It's crazy that in 2020-something, clean water is still a luxury for some people," Erica said, tapping her pen against her sketchpad. "We want to change that." I told them about my scholarship, my dream of designing clean water systems, and how I'd been studying filtration methods for months. Jamal's eyebrows lifted. "Then you're exactly who we need. We've been stuck on the membrane issue for weeks." That afternoon, I forgot about my calculus homework. We huddled around their laptop, swapping notes and ideas, arguing over design choices, laughing when Miguel's rough sketch of a filtration tank looked suspiciously like a popcorn machine. By the time we packed up, my head was buzzing, not just from caffeine, but from the realization that I wasn't alone anymore. These people got it. They didn't laugh when I spoke passionately about water chemistry or distribution networks. They leaned in, asked questions, and offered their own solutions. Over the next few weeks, the campus cafe became our unofficial headquarters. We'd meet between classes, pushing tables together to make space for notebooks, laptops, and half-empty mugs. Erica covered the table in quick pencil sketches, Miguel ran simulations on his tablet, and Jamal kept a running spreadsheet of materials and costs. Sometimes the conversations veered into the personal. Jamal's stories about his younger sister, Erica's obsession with rock climbing, Miguel's habit of cooking for his entire dorm floor. But they always circled back to the same thing: how to create something that could make a real difference. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the campus, Jamal leaned back in his chair and said, "We should name this thing." Erica smirked. "We don't even have a prototype yet." "Names make things real," Jamal countered. I looked at the napkin where Erica had been doodling possible designs. "What about Clear Future?" I said. "It's simple and it says what we want, a future where clean water is for everyone." Jamal tapped it into his phone, testing the sound. Miguel nodded. "I like it." The name stuck. Walking back to my dorm that night, the air crisp and cool, I thought about how different this felt from working alone in the library back home. Then my dream had been a fragile thing I had to protect from ridicule. Now it was out in the open, shared and strengthened by people who wanted the same future I did. For the first time in my life, I felt like part of a tribe, and that tribe had a mission. Senior year crept up on us faster than I expected. Between classes, part-time jobs, and countless late-night work sessions, Clear Future had grown from sketches on cafe napkins into something solid. By October, we had enough research notes, concept drawings, and feasibility studies to take the next step, make it official. Registering a company sounded daunting, but Jamal handled most of the paperwork, reading each form aloud like it was a sacred text. We crowded into the campus library's computer lab to file the LLC online, the four of us leaning over the screen as though the state of Texas might deny us if we didn't stare hard enough. "Okay," Jamal said, clicking the final button. "Clear Future is now a legal entity." Erica let out a low whistle. "We're officially broke business owners." Miguel grinned. "But broke with purpose." We celebrated with day-old muffins from the cafe and promises that someday we'd toast with something better. But the truth was, even without money, it felt monumental. This wasn't just an idea anymore. It had a name, a registration number, and a future. That's when Jamal suggested we move our work to his garage. "My dad's been using it to store old fishing gear. We can clear it out and set up a proper workspace." Proper might have been a stretch. When we first stepped inside, it smelled faintly of gasoline, dust, and motor oil. Stacks of cardboard boxes lined the walls, and a rusting lawnmower sat in one corner like a relic from another era. Still, to us, it was perfect. Over the next few weekends, we transformed it. Miguel built sturdy workbenches from reclaimed wood. Erica painted the walls white to reflect more light. Jamal installed shelves for tools and bins for components. I labeled everything with masking tape and Sharpie: filters, tubing, wiring, spare parts. The first night we fired up our borrowed soldering iron, the air filled with that metallic tang of heated circuitry. We hovered over the table as Miguel carefully attached sensor leads to a prototype filtration unit. The hum of the power strip a steady backdrop to our excited chatter. It wasn't glamorous work. There were nights when the heater barely kept the cold at bay, and afternoons when the West Texas heat turned the garage into a sauna. But in that cramped space, ideas came alive. We tested different filtration membranes, some cutting edge, others improvised from materials we could afford. Erica kept detailed logs of every trial, noting flow rates, contaminant reduction, and durability. Jamal ran cost projections, muttering about grant applications and investor pitches. I focused on optimizing our designs for portability, sketching units that could be deployed quickly in remote areas. One evening, while soldering a connection, Miguel leaned back and said, "You know, one day we're going to look back at this garage and laugh. We'll be in some high-tech lab, and we'll remember how we used to fight over who got the good screwdriver." I smiled, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Let's make sure we get to that day." Some nights, I'd stay after the others left, just listening to the faint hum of the cooling equipment. It was the same kind of quiet focus I'd felt in the library back home, only now it was layered with the satisfaction of building something real. The plan still felt far from reality. Our prototype was clunky, and the funding was non-existent, but the dream was alive. More than that, it was no longer mine alone to carry. Clear Future was ours. And in that garage, under the flicker of a single overhead bulb, it felt unstoppable. It was a Thursday night when Jamal first mentioned his dad's visit. We were in the garage, elbows deep in a stubborn pump assembly, when he said almost casually, "By the way, my dad's in town this weekend." I told him he could stop by and see the prototype. I didn't think much of it until Saturday morning, when a sleek black SUV rolled up to the curb outside the garage. Out stepped a tall man in his late 60s, silver hair neatly combed, wearing jeans and a crisp button-down shirt that probably cost more than our entire month's equipment budget. "Sophie, this is my dad, Harold Pierce," Jamal said, setting down his wrench. Harold's handshake was firm, his eyes sharp and assessing in a way that made me feel like he was already weighing more than just my words. "Jamal's told me about you," he said. "Says you're the brain behind half the ideas in here." I laughed awkwardly. "More like a quarter. We're a team." The garage smelled of solder and warm circuitry, the air heavy with the heat from our desk lamps. We walked him through the setup, our filtration unit prototype, the water quality testing station, the makeshift storage shelves lined with labeled bins. Erica explained the membrane trials, Miguel described the flow rate tests, and I outlined our plans for field deployment. Harold listened without interrupting, occasionally asking a question that cut straight to the point. "What's your estimated production cost per unit? What's the failure rate on those membranes in real-world conditions? How scalable is this design?" When we finished, he stood quietly for a moment, tapping his thumb against his palm. Then he said, "You know, I spent 30 years in the oil industry, made a lot of money finding ways to pull things out of the ground. But I've been thinking lately, it's time I invested in something that put something good back in." The room went still. "I like what you're building," he continued. "I like that you're solving a problem that shouldn't exist in this country or anywhere. If you're serious about getting a pilot treatment facility off the ground, I'm willing to invest. Heavily." For a second, I wasn't sure I'd heard him right. "Invest as in I'll cover your startup costs, initial manufacturing, and the lease on a site near a water source. You focus on perfecting your system, I'll make sure you have the resources to do it." Jamal grinned like a kid at Christmas. Miguel's eyes widened. Erica mouthed, "Oh my God." I felt a lump rising in my throat. For years, the only older man in my life with any influence had been my father, and he'd treated my ambition like a joke. Now here was Harold Pierce, someone with decades of business experience and the means to back it up, saying he believed in what we were doing, in what I was doing. "Why us?" I asked quietly. Harold's smile was small but genuine. "Because you're not afraid to get your hands dirty, but you've also got vision. I've seen a lot of people with one or the other. Very few have both." We sat around Jamal's workbench for the next hour, coffee mugs balanced among circuit boards, sketching out what the next 6 months could look like. Harold didn't sugarcoat the challenges, permits, suppliers, regulatory hurdles, but he spoke like these were problems we could solve, not walls we couldn't climb. When he finally left, promising to email us the paperwork, the garage felt charged with new energy. Erica clapped her hands together. "We're doing this, for real." Miguel laughed. "Guess it's time to stop calling it a hobby." I just stood there, staring at the prototype on the table. For the first time, the dream didn't feel fragile. It felt funded, supported, and maybe most importantly, believed in. That night, as I lay in bed with the silver pen on my nightstand, I thought about how far I'd come from the barbecue where my father had laughed in my face. I didn't know yet how he'd react to all this. But I did know one thing. Harold Pierce had given me something my father never had: his faith. The first few months after Harold's investment were a blur of late nights, tight deadlines, and an endless to-do list. Permits to secure, suppliers to negotiate with, prototypes to refine. At first, the exhaustion felt almost glamorous, like the tiredness you see in movies when people are chasing a dream. But by the 4th month, glamour had turned into something heavier. I was averaging 4 hours of sleep, surviving on cold takeout and bad coffee. My brain felt like a computer running too many programs at once, lagging, glitching, and prone to freezing up altogether. One Thursday morning, I stared at the filtration unit for 10 full minutes before realizing I'd been holding the same wrench the whole time, not moving. Jamal noticed. "You okay?" he asked gently. "Fine," I lied, even though the words scraped my throat on the way out. That weekend, the Carter family dinner loomed on my calendar like a deadline I hadn't studied for. My father insisted I come. "We haven't seen you in months. Sophie, don't go getting too big for your britches." When I arrived, the dining room looked the same as always, heavy oak table, the smell of rosemary chicken, voices overlapping in casual chatter. But I felt out of sync, like I was moving half a beat slower than everyone else. Janice, my sister-in-law, was perched at the far end, her hair and nails perfectly done, scrolling on her phone between bites. She looked up when I sat down and gave me a sweet, sharp smile. "So, how's the little water hobby? Still keeping you busy?" "It's not a hobby," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "We're in the middle of building our pilot facility." Robert chuckled from the head of the table. "A pilot facility sounds like a fancy way of saying you're still playing around." He glanced at Bart, who smirked. "See, Janice, this is why you stick with real work, something you can count on to pay the bills." The words landed like a slap. I'd worked until my eyes blurred, skipped meals to finish schematics, negotiated contracts on 2 hours of sleep, and to them it was still a joke. Janice tilted her head, feigning sympathy. "I mean, it's great you're having fun with it, Sophie, but eventually you'll want to settle down and, be realistic." I felt the heat rising in my face, my chest tightening. I wanted to throw every success, every metric, every line of Harold's investment agreement in their faces. But the exhaustion wrapped around me like a lead blanket, and all I could manage was a quiet, "Excuse me," before slipping out onto the back porch. The cool night air hit me like a shock. I gripped the railing, staring out at the dark yard, listening to the muffled laughter from inside. It was the same sound I'd heard at that barbecue years ago, the sound of people so certain they were right about me. For a moment, the old shame crept back in, whispering that maybe they were right, that maybe I'd poured too much of myself into something that would never work. My shoulders sagged under the weight of it. By the time I left that night, I didn't bother saying goodbye. The ride home felt endless, the city lights blurring past the bus windows. When I got back to my apartment, I set my bag on the floor and sat there in the dark for a long time, too tired to even take off my shoes. I had built my life around this dream, but right then, it felt like it was eating me alive. The Monday after that dinner, I dragged myself into the garage lab late. The others were already there, Jamal reviewing spreadsheets, Erica bent over a soldering iron, Miguel tinkering with the pump assembly. Jamal looked up first. "You okay? You didn't answer anyone's texts all weekend." I dropped my bag onto the nearest stool. "Family stuff and burnout stuff." The words felt heavier than I expected. Erica set down her tools. "Then it's time for an intervention." Before I could argue, Miguel slid a chair toward me. "Sit, no arguments, you've been doing too much." "I'm fine," I started, but Jamal cut me off. "You're not fine. You've been running on fumes for weeks, we see it. And if you burn out completely, this whole thing suffers, not just you." Something in his tone made me stop. I realized they weren't just worried about deadlines or the project's progress. They were worried about me. Erica pulled up the project timeline on her laptop. "Here's what's going to happen. We're splitting your workload. I'll take over the membrane testing logs. Miguel can handle the prototype assembly schedule. Jamal will deal with the suppliers this month." I shook my head. "I can't dump everything on you guys." "You're not dumping," Jamal said. "We're a team. We carry each other when it's needed." It was the kind of thing my father would have laughed at, the idea that relying on others was strength, not weakness. But here, in this dusty garage that smelled faintly of solder and machine oil, it didn't feel like weakness at all. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. The next few days were slower for me. I came in later, left earlier, spent afternoons in the quiet of my apartment catching up on sleep and eating meals that didn't come out of takeout containers. It felt strange, almost guilty at first, but gradually the fog in my brain began to lift. One night, I found myself back in the garage after everyone had left. The air was still warm from the day, the faint hum of the filtration unit filling the silence. I stood at the workbench, tracing the lines of our latest design sketch with my finger, and for the first time in weeks, I felt that familiar pull, the spark that had got me into all this in the first place. The next day, I stayed after to work on a new concept for optimizing the flow rate through the filter cartridges. It was small, nothing revolutionary, but it was mine, and the satisfaction of solving it lit up my chest. When the others came in and saw what I'd done, Erica grinned. "She's back," Jamal nodded. "Told you she just needed space to breathe." We fell back into our rhythm after that, but it wasn't the same as before. It was better. I didn't feel like I was carrying the whole thing on my shoulders anymore. We shared the load, and in doing so, we started moving faster. Late nights in the lab didn't feel like a grind anymore. They felt like momentum. We laughed more, argued less, and the prototype evolved with each iteration. One Friday evening, as we ran a successful 48-hour filtration test without a single failure, I caught myself smiling, not because of the results, but because I was here doing this with them. I'd almost let my father's voice drown out my own, but my team had pulled me back before it was too late. And now, the hum of our equipment didn't just keep me steady, it reminded me exactly why I'd started. By early spring, the garage was almost too small for us. Prototypes crowded every surface, sleek silver cylinders, compact control panels, testing rigs cobbled together from both high-end parts and whatever we could salvage from hardware stores. The whiteboard on the far wall was crammed with flow rate data, contaminant removal percentages, and notes in a rainbow of marker colors. "This is it," Jamal said one Friday afternoon, capping a marker with a decisive snap. "We've got our final design." Miguel gave the nearest unit a proud pat. "She's ready for the real world." It felt surreal. After years of planning, building, failing, and rebuilding, Clear Future's first fully operational filtration unit was sitting in front of us, polished and functional. The casing gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the sensors responded instantly, and the water it produced met every target metric we'd set. Erica leaned against the workbench. "So, Trinity River next week." We'd picked the Trinity for our pilot site partly because of its proximity, but also because it was unpredictable. Rain could send pollutants surging downstream, and dry spells could leave the flow sluggish. If our system could handle that, it could handle almost anything. The week leading up to the test was a blur of checklists and double checks. We loaded the unit into Harold's trailer along with backup parts, testing kits, laptops, and enough snacks to feed a small army. Harold himself insisted on coming along. "I've invested in this thing," he said with a grin. "I want to see it drink from the river and spit out something worth drinking." The morning of the test, the riverbank was cool and damp, the air tinged with the earthy scent of wet soil and spring grass. Sunlight danced on the water's surface, but closer to shore it was cloudy, tinged with the kind of murky brown we knew our filters would tackle. We set up under a canopy Harold had brought, bolting the filtration unit to a sturdy frame and running intake hoses down into the shallows. Erica checked the seals while Miguel connected the power system. Jamal and I prepped the testing kits for the water samples we'd collect before and after filtration. When everything was ready, Jamal glanced at me. "You want to do the honors?" I nodded, my hands steady as I powered on the unit. A low hum filled the air, the same familiar sound from the garage, only now it was layered with the rush of the river and the call of distant birds. The intake hose trembled as water flowed in, disappearing into the heart of the machine. Minutes passed. We hovered, checking gauges, adjusting valves, watching as the first trickle of clear water flowed from the output pipe into a waiting container. Erica dipped a testing strip into it, then bent over the small analyzer screen. "Contaminants. Virtually zero," she said slowly. "This is cleaner than half the tap water in the city." The rush of relief was immediate. We still had a full day of testing ahead, running the unit under different flow rates, monitoring energy use, measuring output volume, but the first result told us what we needed to know. It worked. As the day went on, the anticipation turned electric. Every successful run built our confidence. By late afternoon, we'd logged enough data to start drafting the official report. Harold stood by the canopy, watching the river with a satisfied expression. "You've got something here," he said to me quietly. "Something that's going to matter." I thought about how far we'd come, from sketches on cafe napkins to a humming, functional unit pulling clean water from a muddy river. But even in that moment of triumph, I felt a flicker of caution. We'd proven the machine could work here under these conditions. But the stakes were higher now. One bad test in the wrong place, one malfunction in front of the wrong audience, could unravel everything we'd built. Still, as we packed up at sunset, the last light glinting off the polished casing of the prototype, I let myself feel the victory. For the first time, I could see the path not just to success, but to something much bigger, something undeniable. The Carter dining room was loud again. just like it always was. Forks clinking against plates, overlapping voices, the faint clatter from the kitchen as my stepmother cleared dishes too quickly, like she couldn't wait for the night to be over. I sat midway down the table, trying to focus on my baked potato instead of the heavy knot in my stomach. My phone was in my lap, the screen dark but my thumb hovering over the power button. We'd run the Trinity River results through 3 separate labs over the past month, each confirming what we'd seen on site. Our filtration system wasn't just working, it was outperforming every comparable unit on the market. The last set of official validation numbers was due any minute. Along with them, a valuation report from the investment firm Herald had connected us with. So I told him, "You don't pour concrete in that weather unless you want it to crack," my father was saying from the head of the table, his voice carrying over everyone else's. He had that easy, confident tone he always got when he was talking about the construction business, the one that made people lean in and nod along. Then his gaze landed on me. "And what about you, Sophie? Still chasing that water thing?" A couple of cousins chuckled. Bart smirked over his wine glass. I swallowed hard. "It's going well," Robert snorted. "Well, I hope so. Time to quit playing and get yourself a normal job, one that pays. You've had your fun, but the world's not run on pipe dreams." The knot in my stomach pulled tighter. I could feel Janice watching me from across the table, her mouth twitching like she was holding back a comment. My phone buzzed. The sound was so sharp in my ears it drowned out everything else for a moment. I slid my thumb across the screen under the table. It was a call from Jamal. I excused myself quickly, ignoring Robert's raised eyebrow, and stepped into the hallway. "Tell me you have news," I whispered into the phone. On the other end, Jamal's voice was steady but electric. "Lab results came in. Every metric passed with room to spare. And Sophie, our valuation just came through." My pulse quickened. "Well, $3 billion. For a second, I couldn't speak. The number was so far beyond what I'd let myself imagine that it didn't feel real. My breath caught. Jamal kept going. "The firm wants to fast-track funding for large-scale production. We're talking contracts, press coverage, everything. You did it, Sophie." "We did it," I wanted to say, but the words caught in my throat. When I walked back into the dining room, my phone still in my hand, the conversation faltered. Robert glanced up. "Something wrong?" I looked at him, at all of them, and for once I didn't feel the urge to shrink under their gaze. "No," I said. "Something very, very right." Before I could say more, Janice's phone dinged on the table. Then Bart's. Then 3 more down the line. One by one, relatives began pulling out their phones, their faces shifting from idle interest to open shock. A cousin gasped. Someone muttered my name. Robert's phone buzzed next. He pulled it from his pocket, squinted at the screen, and froze. I knew what they were seeing. The press release Herald's PR team must have sent out the moment the valuation was confirmed. Clear Future's breakthrough water filtration technology valued at $3 billion after record-breaking field tests. The headline was everywhere. I didn't have to say anything. The silence in the room said it all. Robert's fork hovered over his plate, his jaw tight, the lines around his mouth deepening. The balance had shifted, and we both knew it. "You're serious," he finally said, but it wasn't a question. I met his gaze. "I've always been serious." No one laughed this time. The rest of the meal passed in a haze. People whispered to each other, phones lighting up with articles and notifications. I caught snippets, mentions of investors, expansion plans, interviews. But my eyes kept flicking to my father, who ate in silence, his posture rigid. He didn't congratulate me. Didn't say a word about the years I'd spent chasing something he never believed in. And yet, he didn't call it a pipe dream either. When dessert was served, I excused myself again, this time stepping out onto the back porch. The night air was cool, the hum of distant traffic mixing with the chirp of crickets. My phone buzzed with messages, congratulations from colleagues, old classmates, even a few strangers who'd read the article. I leaned against the railing, looking out into the dark yard. This was the moment I'd been chasing for years. Not the money, not even the headlines, but the undeniable proof that I'd been right to believe in myself when no one else did. Inside, the laughter had shifted, lighter now, tinged with awe instead of mockery. Maybe someday Robert would be able to join it. Maybe not. Either way, I didn't need his approval anymore. I had my team. I had my work. I had a future that was, at last, entirely my own. And I had just changed the game.